Unit 19 State Power as elaborated by Marx, Weber, Parson and others. Contents 19.1 Introduction, 19.2 The concept of state, 19.3 Marx on state, 19.4 Weber on state, 19.5 Durkheim on state, 19.6 The concept of power, 19.7 Marx on power, 19.8 Weber on power, 19.9 Parson on power, 19.10 Other theoretical models on state and power, 19.11 Conclusion, 19.12 Further reading, 19.13 References. Learning objectives: the concepts of state and power and their interrelationship. The conceptualization of state as an institution by Marx, Weber and Durkheim. The conceptualization of power in relation to state and society by Marx, Weber and Parsons. The conceptualization of state and power in other theoretical models such as pluralist, elitist, neo-Marxist, etc. 19.1 Introduction. In this unit, we are going to study the concept of state and power as elaborated by Karl Marx, Max Weber and others. Here we will look into the definitions and components of state and power as enunciated by these thinkers. They have interpreted the concepts according to the historical and political necessities of the period they lived. They have adopted differing methods and understanding for interpreting the universal concept of state and power. Karl Marx and Max Weber are two prominent social thinkers who elaborated the features of modern state as well as the concept of power in relation to state and society. There are also different theoretical models, pluralist, neo-Marxist, elitist, etc., on state and power. Most of that are responses to Marxian and Weber theories on state and on their understanding of how centralized government uses power. Power relations are normally elaborated in terms of the cause factors that enable one person or a group of persons to determine the actions of others, and power in usually explained in relation to governmental or state authority. An examination of Marxian, Weberian and other theoretical models of state as an institution has been done in the first half of the unit. An in-depth analysis of the concept of power in relation to state and society has been done in the second half of the unit. 19.2 The concept of state. The term state is commonly used as a synonym for nation, government, society or country. One of the prerequisites of state is sovereign power, which implies super authority of power. Aristotle defined state as a union of families and villages having for its end a perfect and self-sufficing life, which means happy and honorable life. According to MacIver, the state is an association which, acting through law as promulgated by government endowed to this end with coercive power, maintains within a community territorially demarcated universal external conditions of social order. It can otherwise be said that when a group of people are permanently settled on a definite territory and have government of their own, free from any kind of external control, they constitute a state and it has sovereign power upon its people. Das and Chowdhury, 1999. State uses power as a mechanism to keep the society bound together. The state uses power as legislative, judicial, military and planning function. Though legislative function, it enforces the norms of the society. Judicial function uses power to exert physical force for the protection of citizens' lives and property. Military function uses power to establish relations with other societies, and planning function is related to the allocation of scarce goods and resources. Now let us examine the concept of state as elaborated in different theoretical models. 19.3 Marx on state. Although Marx had no fully developed theory of state, he did discuss it in various ways throughout his writings. Marx traces the development of the state to the division of labor in the society. Primitive societies are simple and less complex and marked by least division of labor. As the societies grow from primitive to capitalist, it becomes more and more complex, and there arises some central organizing agency to control. This ultimately leads to the formation of state. His views on states are closely related to his classification of society. From him, the basis of state is force, and the state exercises power and authority for promoting the interest of the dominant class and suppressing and exploiting weaker classes, who are collectively called as proletariat in the context of capitalist society. He views states as a man-made institution rather than a natural institution. The Marx look at the state as a product of class struggle and as an instrument of class rule. Thus, for Marx, the state is essentially a class structure, an organization of one class dominating over other class. He views that state as originated as a certain stage of economic development in the history of humanity, when society was broken into two classes, namely haves and have-nots. In Marxist theory, the most important activity of human being is economic activity. According to him, understanding the way a society organizes its production is the key to understand the whole of its social structure. His view is that the production of the means of substances forms the foundation upon which various institutions, the legal conception and art, and even the ideas of religion of the people concerned have been evolved. Marx stresses economic production as the key structural features of any society, and he called the way it organizes its production as its infrastructure. The rest of its social organization, its non-economic activities such as ideas, beliefs, philosophies, legal system, the state, etc., he called superstructure. The superstructure of any form of society is affected by its infrastructure, that is, the economic activities of the society. State, according to Marx, is a non-economic institution and hence a part of superstructure. The formation of and functioning of the state is therefore depend on the way the society organizes its economic production. Marx called the different ways of production of goods in the society as modes of production, and based on the modes of production, Marx distinguished the five historical epochs in the development of humanity. These, in chronological order, are primitive, communist, ancient, feudal, capitalistic, and communist, each of depicting its own characteristic state and government. Apart from the first and the last modes of production, that is primitive, communist, and communist mode, each mode of production has one crucial characteristic in common. Each of them produces goods based on class. In each of the historical epochs, there are two classes. One is the minority dominant class, and the one which owns the modes of production, and the other majority subordinate class, the class that does not own means of production, or the exploited class which do the productive work. Those who own means of production control the state. Whenever there is change in the mode of production in a society, the government, the physical form of state, also undergoes simultaneous change, and in irrespective of the form of the society, ancient, feudal, or capitalist, the state invariably is, according to Marx, an instrument for exploitation in hands of dominant class. Marx's deliberation of state as an institution is mainly based on the capitalistic form of society. For him, state is a centralized organizing agency which was necessarily involved in the domination of one class over the other. The prominent class Marx talks about in relation to capitalist society are bourgeois and proletariat. According to Marx, capitalism is an inherent expanding system, and the social class as its term is carried into political power not because of any deliberate or conscious action, but because that is the way the society develops. It is argued that Marx believed the state to be a sort of conspiracy against the working class, or that the wealth of the bourgeois could be used to ensure that moreover is in power pursues its interest. For Marx, The concern of the state for the individual liberty could be seen as an attempt to enforce the right of individual property owner against those without property, whose only power lay in their banding together to take collective action. The political struggle of trade union rights represent the collective action of proletariat, those without property. Box 19.1, Dialectical Materialism. According to Marx, all history can be explained by the conflict between opposing forces, theses and antitheses. Every stage of history which falls short of perfection carries within himself the seed for its own destruction. Each stage reached in the march to the classless society, the thesis called into being its opposite or antithesis, and from the clash between the two new syntheses will become the thesis until the classless society has been achieved. This philosophy of inevitability of change resulting from the struggle of opposites and determined by concrete realities rather than ideas is called dialectical materialism. It is the basic philosophy of communism. In dialectical materialism, evolution is the development of matter from within, environment helping or hindering, but neither originating the evolutionary process nor capable of preventing it from reaching its inevitable goal. According to Marx, capitalism had to be replaced because the evolution of society's instructions is a natural and inevitable process of history. Capitalism itself is the product of the struggle between lords and serfs in feudal society. The evolution into capitalism instead of some other form of social contract was due to the arrival of machines and the factory system. This synthesis in turn created two new contending forces, the capitalist class of or bourgeoisie, which wants the means of production, and the wage workers or proletariat class, which has to sell its labor to survive. From the writings of Marx, one can decipher broadly three models of state: the liberal, arbiter, and functionalist. In his early writing, it can be seen that the bourgeoisie rules the state or manipulate the state machinery to protect their interest, or to put in Marx's words, state is but a committee for managing the common affairs of the old bourgeoisie. Marx and Engels in 1968. On this model, economic power is quite simply translated into political power, by means of which the dominant bourgeois rules over subordinate class through liberal state. In his later writing, Marx made various modifications and reservations about these earlier views. In his later writings, which were more empirical, he viewed and talks about different sections of bourgeoisie engaging in political struggles through and over the state. Here he suggests a different model of state, an arbiter model. In 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, he sketches the modern state in such a way as to suggest its relative autonomy from the interest of bourgeoisie. The modern state has grown so strong that in exceptional moment when bourgeoisie cannot completely dominate the other classes against which it must struggle, the state may become an arena for combating interest, an apparent moderator, and may even act independently to limit the power of bourgeoisie. For example, the Factory Acts and the arguments over the Corn Laws in UK in the 1840s can see a struggle between the industrial bourgeois and agricultural bourgeois. He also talks about the state being controlled by people who do not belong to the dominant class, bourgeois, but nevertheless exercise power in the interest of the dominant class. For example, in UK by the end of the 19th century, through the central governing body constituted by the landowning class, they exercised power in interest of industrial bourgeois. This reaches to the conclusion that whomever comes to power, they represent the interest of dominant class in the capitalist society. This is because for the economic development of the society, the state has to protect the interest of the dominant class. In his later works, Marx suggested a third model of state, the functionalist model. In capital, Volume 3, he depicts state as a supernatural determined entirely by changes in the economic pace in the society. He explains if capitalism is to survive, it requires a reasonably healthy workforce educated to a level necessary to operate at the relevant level of technological development, and it needs to ensure that the next generation is raised in a reasonable way to whatever standards are required. The state develops in order to fulfill these needs. In Marx's view, in a class society, superstructure is indispensable to its survival. It represents the society's cultural characteristic and the institutions that promote these characteristics. Its infrastructure, its class-based mode of production survives so long as class character of the society remains unorganized or is considered legitimate by those who it subordinates. The superstructure state as a prominent institution ensures this happens. That means the state essentially functions as a system integrator. This is how the Marx views state as working in the interest of the ruling class, because it is working to reproduce the sort of economic and social system that favors the class that rules. For Marx, in any state, the dominant class tries to promote and protect its own interest as against the interest of the other classes and formulates the laws. And thus the purpose of the state is to protect private property, and its function is to oppress the possessing class in the interest of the possessing class. Irrespective of the form of the state, whether the democratic, republic or monarchy, it is used as an agency for the oppression of one class by another. It is only the class interests that are represented at political level, and ultimately the economic power will determine how state power is to be used. Reflections and Action 19.1 elucidate the different models of state depicted by Karl Marx. Marx states that the system integration in capitalism is constantly threatened by class conflicts, and it is supported by the state and by ruling ideologies. He predicts that the class struggle in the capitalist society necessarily leads to the dictatorship of the proletariat, and through the dictatorships of proletariat, there would be the abolition of all classes through a revolutionary transformation and the establishment of classless society, the communist society. When the classless society is established and there is no suppressive function for the state, it would be required only to perform the economic function. The abolition of class distinctions could also lead to the fulfillment of political functions of the state, and the people will accustomed to the voluntary performance of their social responsibility and the observance of the rules of the socialist's life. At this stage, there would be no necessity of state, and according to Marx, the state would wither away. Box 19.2 Marxism. Marxism as a theoretical system developed out of and drew inspiration from the writings of Karl Marx. However, Marxism as a codified body of thought came into existence only after Marx's death. It was the product of attempts by later Marxists to condense Marx's ideas and theories into a systematic and comprehensive worldview that suited the needs of growing socialist movement. However, a variety of Marxist traditions can be identified, including classical Marxism, the Marxism of Marx, orthodox Marxism or the dialectical materialism, the machinistic form of Marxism that served as the basis for Soviet Union, Soviet communism, and Western modern or neo-Marxism, which tend to view Marxism as a humanist philosophy and are skeptical about its scientific and determinist pretensions. The cornerstone of Marx's philosophy is what Engels called the materialist concept of history. This highlights the importance of economic life and the conditions under which the people produce and reproduce their means of substance, reflected simplistically in the belief that the economic base, consisting essentially the mode of production or economic system, conditions or determines the ideological and political superstructure. Marx theory therefore explains social, historical and cultural development in terms of material and class factors. The basis of the Marxist tradition is Marx's teleological theory of history, which suggests that the history is driven forward through a dialectical process in which internal contradictions within each mode of productions are reflected in class antagonism. Capitalism then is only the most technological advanced of class societies and is itself destined to be overthrown in a proletarian revolution which will culminate in the establishment of a classless communist society. The intellectual attraction of Marxism has been that it embodies a remarkable breadth of vision, offering to understand and explain virtually all aspects of social and political existence and uncovering the significance of processes that conventional theory ignores. Politically, it has been attacked exploitation and oppression and had a particularly strong appeal to disadvantaged groups and people, which, with the collapse of communism in former USSR and some East European countries, some group of academicians started arguing that the relevance of communism and Marxism came to an end. However, the fact of the matter is that the forms of communism as practiced by those countries failed to deliver goods and the system itself failed due to a variety of reasons. This has nothing to do with Marxism as a theory, which is still one of the foremost theoretical formulation of class, power, state and society. 90.4 Weber on State. Max Weber suggested in Politics as a Vocation that the state is a human community or a special kind of institutions that claims the monopoly of legitimate use of physical force within a given territory. By this he meant not only that the state had the ability to ensure the obedience of its citizens, but also the acknowledged right to do so. A monopoly of legitimate violence is therefore the practical expression of the state sovereignty. He saw that the state as the most powerful institutions in modern society since it has gained the legitimate monopoly of force over a given territory. He elaborated four defining characteristics of modern state. First, it has a legal and administrative order which is subject to change by legislation only, not by the whims of a lord or the dictate of a charismatic leader. Secondly, it has an administration which works in accordance with legislation. This means that civil servants and judiciary do not make up their own rules but implement those formed by the legislature. Thirdly, the state has binding authority on all its members and over the acts carried out in its territory, and membership is usually given by birth. Finally, state can use force if that is legally prescribed and permitted. For Weber, the political society is one whose existence and order is continuously safeguarded within a given territorial area by the threat and application of physical force on the part of the administration staff. And a political organization becomes a state where it is unable to successfully to exercise a legitimate monopoly over the organized use of force within a given territory. According to Weber, legal, religious and political institutions and their interrelationship has received significance to economic structures and economic development, not vice versa as seen by Marx. Weber opposed to Marx economic determinism. He took concentration of the means of administration as most important factor in the nation state. It can be seen that Weber's theory of state and authority are cordially associated. This in turn has close association with his typology of domination. Weber talks about three types of domination: charismatic, traditional and legal rational. According to him, these three types of domination coexist in any situation, but it is likely that one or more will be dominant. Weber says legal rational domination is more predominant in modern state. According to Weber, the modern state is legitimate if people believe in its legitimacy. Any three kind of domination can exist in modern state. We cannot choose between the three or any rational ground. Even each can be justified on its own ground. Each system justifies on itself. Traditional domination justified by tradition, charismatic domination by charisma, and in rational legal domination laws are legitimate if they are enacted according to the law. There is no overall or superior sets of values by means of which we choose better or worse systems. Weber believed that in a modern state any norm could be enacted as a law with the expectation that it would be obeyed. Government and government apparatus are bound by this abstract system that these laws comprise and justice is the application of these laws. In such a system of governance, people hold authority, doing so by virtue of being temporary office bearers rather than possessing personal authority, and people obey laws, not the office bearers who enforce them. The state, with a national legal authority, could not interfere with individuals' rights without the consent of the people through the duly elected representatives. Reflections and Actions 19.2. What are the salient features of Weber's state? Compare and contradict the views of Marx and Weber on state. For Weber, bureaucracy is the organizational apparatus of the modern state, and the modern capitalistic state is completely dependent upon the bureaucratic organization for its continued existence. Weber describes the state as gaining its power in modernity by concentrating the means of administration in the hands of an absolute monarch. Bureaucratic setup developed, for example, in ancient Egypt, when the monarch needed a permanent army to ensure supplies of arms and military equipment. According to Weber, these developments were the most important factors promoting the emergence of modern state, in which the expert officialdom based on the division of labor is wholly separated from the ownership of its means of administration. Officials in modern rational bureaucracies have little or no control over they do, since the rules and proceeds of bureaucracies takes on a life of their own, restricting the activities and decision of those who work in them to the functions of the offices they fill. The bureaucracy, see in box 2 for history, features of ideal type of bureaucracy because become the still hard housing in modern state. This growth of rational state, which has its corpus of bureaucratic official, is not only derivative of economic rationalization, but to some extent preceded the development of capitalism, as well as created conditions which promoted its rise. The head of the system of the legal authority or bureaucracy is the head of the state, and it can hold a position through appropriation, election, or designation by succession. But even then, his or her power is legally limited. Box 19.3, Ideal type of bureaucracy. The characteristic features of the ideal type of bureaucracy according to Weber are: 1. A continuous organization of official functions bound by rules. 2. A specific sphere of competence. This involves a sphere of obligation to perform functions which has been marked off as part of systematic division of labor. Then the provision of the incumbent with the necessary authority to carry out this function, and that the necessary means of compulsion are clearly defined and their use is subject to definite conditions. Third, the organization of offices follows the principle of hierarchy, that is, each lower office is under the control of supervision of higher one. There is a right of appeal and of statement of grievances from lower to higher. Hierarchies differ in respect to whether and in what case complaints can lead to ruling from an authority at various points higher in the scale, and as to whether the chances are imposed from higher up or the responsibility for such changes is left to the lower office, the conduct of which was the subject of complaint. 4. The rules which regulate the conducts of an office may be technical rules or norms. In both cases, if their application is to be fully rational, specialized training is necessary. It is thus normally true that only a person who has demonstrated an adequate technical training is qualified to be a member of the administrative staff of such an organized group, and hence only such persons are eligible to appointment to official positions. And 5. In the rational type, it is a matter of principle that the members of the administrative staff should be completely separated from the ownership of the means of production and administration. Officials, employees, and workers attached to the administration staff do not themselves own the non-human means of production and administration. These are rather provided for their use in kind or in money, and the official is obliged to render an accounting of their use. These there exist therefore in principle complete separation of the property belonging to the organization and which is controlled within the sphere of office, and the personal property of official which is available for his own private uses. There is a corresponding separation of the place which official functions are carried the office in this sense of premises from living quarters. 6. In the rational type case, there is also a complete absence of appropriation of his official position by the incumbent, where the rights to an office exist, and as in the case of judges, and recently of an increasing proportion of officials and even of workers, they do not normally serve the purpose of appropriation by the official, but of securing the purely objective and independent character of the conduct of the office, so that is oriented only to the relevant norms. 7. The administrative acts, decisions, and rules formulated and recorded in writing, even in case where oral discussion is the rule or is even mandatory. This applies at least to preliminary discussions and proposals to final decision and to all sorts of orders and rules. The combination of writing documents and continuous organization of social official functions constitute the office, which is the central focus of all type of modern action. According to Weber, though rationalization is evident in economic life, cultural life, etc. of a society, it is fundamentally evident in the modern institutions of administration, more especially bureaucracy. He says, neither capitalism with its connection with the liberalism nor state socialism with its formal commitment to social justice can avoid the use of bureaucratic means of administrative domination. The impersonality and calculability characters of the bureaucracy are seen not only as constraining but also as an extremely efficient in securing the popular compliance with the structures of domination. They are, for Weber, a key instance of a typical modern form of legitimate domination, that is, replacing the appeal of tradition as society's predominant legitimating principle. 19.5. Durkheim on State. Durkheim discussed the nature of and features of the state in his work Professional Ethics and Civil Morals. According to him, the opposition of governing and the governed is central in political life. His views on state are very much associated to his explanation of division of labor and types of solidarity. Durkheim traced the development of the state to the division of labor in the society. As societies become more complex, there should occur the distinction between the governing and governed, which in turn result in the formation of state. For Durkheim, the function of state was to mediate between different interests and in particular to protect the individual against the power of small groups. That is how state protects individuals and balanced group of interest. Mechanical solidarity is the trademark of less developed or primitive society where divisions of labor is very little, whereas societies which highly developed division of labor are held together by organic solidarity. For Durkheim, there was no politics or state existed in primitive societies because there was no or little division of labor and hence no grouping into government and governed. At the same time, he argues that the division of a social group into a governing and governed do not only exist in states. There is a similar division in patriarchal household as well. As Durkheim tries to make a distinction between state and such organization. The size and control of determinate territory will distinguish state from such organizations. But for Durkheim, the crucial features of a state is that it controls not necessarily large number of people, but a number of different secondary social grouping. The state is in the organization of officials concerned with governing these secondary groups. It is not an embodiment of society as whole, but a specialized institution. Durkheim next takes up the relationships of the states to the individual. This, according to Durkheim, is not an issue in societies where the mechanical solidarity dominated, where individuals were absorbed into the social whole, but as organic solidarity develops, the power of the state develops, so also the rights of the individuals. The growth of the state does not threaten but enables the rights of the individuals. Reflections and Action 19.3. Compare the perspective of Marx and Durkheim on state. Durkheim make a clear distinction between society and state. Every society is despotic, at least if nothing from within supervene to restrain its despotism. As societies become more compelled, then there is a need for individuals to move from group to group and need to prevent the secondary groups exercising despotic control over its members. It is the function of the state to provide this need. Durkheim's argument was that given that individual members of society felt their commitment to society, the function of the state was to create and protect the space where the individuals could exercise such responsibility. For Durkheim, society is sui generis. His notion of society dominated everything else. Society exists over and above the individual over whom it is exercised an immense power. This notion of society reflects in his idea about state also. For Durkheim, state essentially is a mediator between secondary groups. The secondary groups are developed in society as the division becomes more sophisticated as in modern societies. The secondary groups mediate between society and the individual just as states mediates between the individual and secondary group. 19.6. The concept of power. Although power is a universal phenomenon in human activities and social relationships, there is no uniform conceptualization of this concept. It is highly abstract and overlearned concept deeply embedded in human society and culture. Though the vast literature in social science on power is scattered and heterogeneous, the concept has been discussed in this literature on a conceptual framework based around power as a characteristic of individual, power as an interpersonal construct, power as a commodity, power as a casual construct, and power as a philosophical construct. Each framework illustrates unique dimensions of the concept of power. The concept of power is often expressed in their literature as the ability to bring about the outcomes as on desire. The social significance of the exercise of power is that it limits the range of choice open to individuals. Sociologists often distinguish between two forms of power, authority and coercion. This unit concentrates in enabling the power in relation to state and society. 17.7. Marx on power. Marx does not give a clear definition of power. For him, power means coercion. Marx views power to be held by a particular group in society at the expenses of the rest of the society. According to him, the source of power in society lies in economic infrastructure and those who own the modes of production. That is, the dominant group uses power to further its own interest and thereby exploiting those who subject to power. Marx argues that although from time to time dominant classes do not resort to naked force to maintain their power and supremacy, the absence of such obvious coercion should not be taken to signify an absence of exploitation. A lack of naked oppression does not indicate lack of oppression and lack of any need of force. Lack of naked oppression does not mean that the domination is not taking place. It is only that the dominated are unaware of their condition because of the effectiveness of the ideologies into which they have been socialized. How do such dominant ideas, which hails in the dominating power of dominant class and the exploitation of the subordinate class, gain such general acceptance? Marxism argued that the particular ideas came to prevail through various key agencies of socialism. Institutions like the family, education systems, and the mass media plays a crucial role in promoting generally held beliefs and values. For Marx, through these institutions of socialism, the real character of of class society is justified, and thus it ensures social inequality and domination, and thereby the acceptance of power structure in the society. This is the key element in Marxist approach to the superstructure, as society's non-economic institutions and the ideas and beliefs they promote. The assumptions is that they exist to pop up as a class-based mode of production. Thus, the power of inequality in the economic infrastructure is reflected in the superstructure. Dominance, dominance and subordination. Marxist theorist argues that institutions like education, state and mass media justify the stereotypical images of superiority and inferiority coinciding with the class production, the class position. Thus, in terms of Marxian theory, the relationship of dominance and subordination in the infrastructure is justified and legalized by the superstructure. For example, in capitalist society, the unequal relationship between employees and employers will be reflected and legitimated in the legal system. A range of legal status protects the rights of property owners, and in particular their right to a disproportionate share of the wealth produced by their employees. Marxists argue that such an analysis of the relationship between the infrastructure and superstructure tells in great deal about power in a class society. That means, for example, in capitalist society, the infrastructure produces particular kind of state, education system, family structure, etc. All institutions of superstructure that reflects the domination of class structure reinforce the power and privileges of the ruling class in the society. Marx views power as to be held by a particular group, dominant class in society, at the expense of the rest of the society, the subordinate class. This is a constant sum concept of power, since a net gain in the power of the dominant group represents a net loss in the power of the next society. The dominant group uses power to further its own interest, and these interests are in direct conflict with the interest of their subject to its power. For Marx, the source of power is in society lies in the economic infrastructure. The basis of dominance or power or power is the ownership of forces of production. The ruling class, those who own the forces of production, uses power to exploit and oppress the subject class in all societies. The case of power to exploit others is defined by Marx's coercion. It is seen as an illegitimate use of power, since it forces the subject class to submit to a situation which is against its interest. The only way to return power to the people is communal ownership of the forces of production, since everyone will now share the same relationship to the forces of production. For power will be shared by all members of society. Here Marx's concept of false consciousness and class consciousness are of importance. When the subordinate class subscribe to dominant ideologies which obscure the real nature of class societies from their gaze, their picture of the world and their place in its falls. When the exploited class realizes their exploited status and start recognizing themselves to belong to the same class, there originates class consciousness among them. In their subjective view of themselves and their conditions comes to match its objective reality. It is the emergence of a class consciousness by a subordinate class that is the key which unlocks the revolution which overthrows the existing power structure of society to replace it with one which suits to the new economic arrangement.